Hi, everybody. Bienvenidos. Welcome to Jerry Moss Plaza at the Music Center. My name is Josephine Ramirez, and I'm with the Music Center. I want to thank all of you for coming, and I also want to thank everyone who's joining us online for the live stream of this evening's conversation. As we get started tonight, I want to take a minute to recognize for all of us gathered here that we are on the sacred and ancestral grounds of the Tongva and a lot of other indigenous groups who call this ground their home. The Music Center acknowledges and honors with gratitude both the land itself and the first people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. Thank you. As I said, my name is Josephine, and I'm with the Music Center. I'm head of TMC Arts, which is the division of the Music Center, TMC, get it, Arts? That's responsible for all of the programming here on Jerry Moss Plaza, also for all the programming across the street at Gloria Molina Grand Park, also for schools, programming we do with schools and neighborhoods all over LA County, and for dance residencies with companies like Paul Taylor Dance Company, the one that prompted tonight's partnership with Zocalo Public Square. Now, since TMC Arts aims with its programming for relevance, for topics that are compelling and accessible, we're a perfect fit for this partnership with Zocalo and for this, this conversation tonight about the role of art in war and ideas around that. As I mentioned, tonight is part of Paul Taylor Dance Company's residency here at the Music Center, and they'll also be performing later this week, right inside that big building there, the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Tonight's discussions are going to be rich and thought-provoking, and I can't wait to get to them. So I'm going to introduce Bianca Collins, who's Director of Public Programs at Zocalo Public Square, and she's going to introduce a little bit more and then tell us about our panelists. So thanks again, and bienvenidos.
Thank you, Josephine. Hello, everyone. I'm Bianca Collins. I'm Director of Public Programs for Zocalo Public Square, an Arizona State University media enterprise. At Zocalo, our mission is to connect people to ideas and to each other. Everything we do is free, and everyone is welcome. We publish original writing and present conversations like this one. We were founded in 2003, and we are celebrating our 20th birthday year. You can find us at ZocaloPublicSquare.org, on podcast platforms, and YouTube, so please subscribe for our latest programs. We're very honored to partner with the Music Center for tonight's program, asking, how is art a weapon in war? After the program, please stay for a reception to continue the conversation with us and each other at the Mullen Wine Bar Garden right behind you. And now I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Viet Thanh Nguyen. He is an author whose debut novel, The Sympathizer, won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. His most recent publication is The Committed, the sequel to The Sympathizer. His other books are The Refugees, Nothing Ever Dies, Vietnam and the Memory of War, and Race and Resistance, Literature and Politics in Asian America. He is a university professor, the Errol Arnold Chair of English, and a professor of English, American Studies, and Ethnicity, and Comparative Literature at the University of Southern California. He is also a recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim and MacArthur Foundations. Viet, over to you.
Thanks so much, Bianca. Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. As you've just heard, my name is Viet Thanh Nguyen, and I'm a novelist as well as a professor at USC. I'm honored to introduce our guests for tonight. First, we have Gelare Khoshgozaran. She is an artist, filmmaker, and writer whose work engages with the legacies of imperial violence. Gelare has presented her work internationally with recent and upcoming exhibitions at ICA LA, the Hammer Museum, and Mass MoCA. She received a BA in photography from University of Arts in Tehran and an MFA from the University of Southern California. Please welcome Gelare Khoshgozaran. Next is Khalil Kinsey. He is the Chief Operating Officer, Chief Curator, and Creative Director for the Kinsey African American Art and History Collection, a traveling exhibition that's had over 16 million visitors and was cited for the President's National Award for Museum and Library Services. This is now on display at SoFi Stadium, so you can go check it out. He's Director of the Kinsey Foundation for Arts and Education and works with many other organizations on education reform, mentoring, and communication. Please welcome Khalil Kinsey. Next is Michael Novak. He is the artistic director of the Paul Taylor Dance Company, known worldwide for its athleticism, expression, and innovation. He graduated from Columbia University and was a celebrated dancer in the company for nearly a decade before becoming artistic director. He has been critically acclaimed for bringing the Taylor Company into a new era and was recently included in Crane's 40 Under 40. Please welcome Michael Novak. Finally, we have Nadya Tolokonnikova. She is a performance artist and activist and the creator of Pussy Riot, a global feminist protest art movement. She was sentenced in 2012 to 2 years imprisonment following an anti-Putin performance and was sent to a Siberian penal colony. She is a co-founder of Media Zona, an independent news service and media outlet, and has spoken before the US Congress, British Parliament, and European Parliament. Please welcome Nadya Tolokonnikova. Thanks, everyone. We'll be taking questions from the audience later in the program. If you're watching online, you can submit questions in the live chat on YouTube. And so with that, let's begin. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask everybody some individual questions. They're coming from such diverse backgrounds, their origins, their practices, their arts, and I wanted to get you to know a little bit about each of them before we get into the big question collectively for the panel. So Michael, I'm going to start with you. Since you're the artistic director of the Paul Taylor Dance Company, and the company's performance of the Green Table at the Music Center is happening this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So first, can you describe for the audience the Green Table?
Yes. So the Green Table is a ballet. It was choreographed in 1932 by German choreographer Kurt Jooss. And this is in between World War I and World War II, and kind of what was happening in dance at the time, both in America and in Europe, was this rejection of the classical ballet canon, notions of body, notions of gender, how the human form could express itself. And in Germany specifically, there was this aggressive movement to not hide the horrors of what was happening within the actual world. And Kurt Jooss created this incredible ballet, which its subtitle is a Dance of Death in 8 different scenes. And he starts us at a table that is green with a bunch of gentlemen in black who decide to go to war. And what follows is the aftermath of that call to action, separate from that room. And the end of the ballet takes us back to those men still at their room, deciding what actually happens next. The ballet does not necessarily give a resolution as much as it presents the futility of war as a never-ending cycle and lets audiences sit back and process what is the next step. It celebrated 90 years last year, and I wanted our company to take it on. It's an incredibly profound work. It is timeless. The interesting thing about the ballet specifically is that 1932 was when it premiered. 1933 is when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. And Hitler specifically invited Kurt Jooss's company to become part of the state under the exclusion of all of the Jews in his company. Kurt Jooss then took his company and overnight fled to England, where he lived for a number of years and brought his company out and brought his art to the world. and didn't come back to Germany until much, much later. So the work as it exists today is because he fled with it. So there's another subtext to the ballet beyond just what you see on stage.
That's really fascinating. And you mentioned that at the end, they're at a table, the men are at a table negotiating what comes next. And when you talk about that, I'm thinking, wow, you're saying it's timeless. It is timeless. We're still in a situation with mostly men around tables deciding what happens next.
Right.
Well, I think it's been on kind of both sides. There's the kind of interesting conundrum that comes with being black in America, you know, in terms of being able to be proud of or to see the American flag and feel a certain patriotism or pride, but then also feel very threatened by it, depending on the context. And that has been the same way that art has been expressed and developed and created on both sides. There's been art that was created in the Civil War and World War I that was saying pretty much for black troops, put us in the game. We want to fight, you know? And then there have been those that have been anti-war. Oftentimes it's rooted in, or at all times it's rooted in this understanding that you may go off and fight for your country, or you will go off and fight for your country, and you'll come back and be treated the same exact way that you were when you left, and you'll be met with the same hostility, and you won't receive the benefits and the distinctions and the awards and the different things that come with fighting with valor and, you know, and patriotism. So that creates I think an outlook that forces us to look internally and say, well, what is our existence right here? Why are we looking outside of ourselves when there are really wars being waged on us? And how can we be part of the resistance? So I think about, you know, the civil rights movement, which in always was a battle, right? It was a war. You think about the abstract expressionist movements, in this case, Norman Lewis and Romare Bearden and Richard Mayhew and others that formed the Spiral Group. Now, these were abstractionists that aren't creating literal works, you know, that are speaking out against war per se, but they created works that had a voice, and they wanted to contribute their work towards the movement for Black lives. And it was a way in which others could make their own interpretations and see themselves in this work and find their fight and find their weapons in this work in a different way. And I think that that's what art is. It is something that can be very literal, but also can be open enough to be something in which you find and are able to locate yourself and your role and your agency, you know, while also perhaps finding a bit of escape, you know, to be able to counter the experience. And at its core, you know, that is, I think, the beauty of art. But also it depends on what we qualify as art, which, you know, if you're someone like me, I see it everywhere. I see it in conversation. I see it in every bit of existence. And so we're talking visual, we're talking performance, we're talking, you know, relationship. It can be something very artistic and something that prompts, for me, I'm more interested in the resistance, right? I'm more interested in what we're able to discover in ourselves that makes us look at this world as one, and each other as in the same on this as part of this same picture, to where we're able to see that a war happening on our soil or elsewhere affects us, and that we have a role in resisting, right?
Yeah. You know, you brought up abstract, the first movement you cited, the Spiral Group, abstract expressionists, for example. It did make me think, you know, of what Michael's also doing, that there's a role for abstraction even when it comes to war. I mean, we're tempted to think that war can only be portrayed in a realistic fashion with bodies and, you know, literal depictions and so on, but you're also making a claim for abstraction as being really important. And you're also talking about art being manifested in other things outside of elite art spaces, but in conversations and so on. I'm wondering if you can comment then on your work as a curator and the collection that you have, and what function you think that has in dealing with Black culture, but also war, and how that serves the resistance and a population that you want to reach out to.
My curation really is rooted in tapping into a consciousness, into providing things that prompt you to look deeper and to see a little more broadly. In a way, in this case, you know, starting with Black America, the information isn't readily available. It isn't something that I mean, we're in a time right now where books are being banned, and there are school systems that are totally altering the truth, right? Those are elements of war. right? Those are elements in which that have been employed in war time and time again. So the question is posed, then where does the information come from? Where's the truth come from? And that's where we come in, providing facts, primary source, things that can't be refuted because they're the genuine, authentic article, and you just depend on open-mindedness and people's own human process to connect the dots and come to their own conclusions, and hopefully look in a different way at the things that they experience in everyday life. I believe that certain wars occur and develop based on the information we have and the information we don't have. And so what I'm trying to do at every turn is to connect these dots and give a broader view of a people and a people's contribution to where the things and the wars that are waged on black communities and black Americans, we have an ammunition and an armor to not just go, you know what I mean? Not to just go one way or the other, but to actually stand tall on what we do know. And the place in this world that we rightfully have.
So Nadia, some of the things that Khalil brought up I think are very relevant to your own work and your own experience. He brought up the idea of art and culture as modes of resistance, book banning in this country as a form of culture war, the war via information or suppression of information or disinformation. He brought up the state waging war on its own people, which we do here in the United States as well. Bring up the example of wars that have been waged against African Americans in various ways. Now, I have confirmed with everybody on the panel that you, among the panelists, are the only one here who has spent time in prison because of your art and your politics. I think a lot of people probably already know about Pussy Riot, but we might want to hear more about that. But did you anticipate that political repression and prison would be a consequence of your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you step into the world of activism in Russia, you know that you may face all sorts of consequences, such as poisoning, getting beaten, jailed, murdered. My friends were assassinated in broad daylight when I was only 19. The friend of mine who was part of the same art collective, she was 22. She was a young anti-fascist journalist. So I did know, yes, and I faced, I saw people who lost their, lost their health because they got bitten with baseball bats because they protested, not even Putin, but for better ecology in their region, in the suburbs of Moscow. So it's known that our regime is based on the rule of thugs. They don't have any grace or honor. The only language that they speak is language of violence and oppression. But, unfortunately, if nobody's going to be working against this regime, nothing is ever going to change. Because even if Putin dies tomorrow, if there is not strong enough resistance, then it's going to start over with just another asshole. So we did know what we were facing, but I guess, there is no simple way of changing history, and it's not fun. It sucks, but that's what you should do.
Can you tell us about the origins of Pussy Riot? Like, sort of walk us through how you and your colleagues decided to come up with this group, why you gave it the name that you did, and you already talked about, you knew what the consequences were going to be.
Yeah, at the time when we started Pussy Riot, I was a part of another conceptual performance art collective that I also co-founded. I was just 17 when we started it, and it was called, interestingly enough, The War by now. And we went with our war against art institutions and complacency and people wanting to live glamorous and comfortable lives while closing their eyes on injustice that is happening right in front of their faces. And we decided to shake it up. So for 5 years, we've been practicing activism performance art that we did on the streets. No, no permits. So we would do things like project giant skull and bones on the White House of Russia, and then go to actually storm the White House of Russia. And we did it, and we ran away with. They never caught us. We wanted to show people of Russia that resisting is indeed an option. We wanted to give an example, and we were hoping that other people will follow. And in order to maximize our effectiveness, we decided to use art. Because if all of us who are here on stage just go and try to organize a rally, there's going to be a small rally that's pretty insignificant, and nobody's going to pay attention. But if you're going to come up with a great art piece, there is a chance that people all around the world are going to hear about it. So I guess it just all comes back to the topic of our conversation, how art is the weapon of war. Or I actually like your words more, it's a weapon of resistance. And then after practicing with this war collective, we started Pussy Riot. We decided to combine something really soft and something that often people use as a derogatory word, pussy, which I think we need to reclaim. And so we decided to use pussy and show that it can be really strong, opinionated, and it can fight back. So we called it Pussy Riot. And we started practicing in the end of 2011. When Putin announced that he's going to become the president pretty much forever. He said, I'm going to go to the third term. Under our constitution, you only can have 2 consecutive terms. And it was the beginning of end. We realized that Russia is going to just directly into death, torture, dark ages, and imprisonment for all of the opponents. So we decided to just go to the street, do pretty much what we're doing today, but with art, and scream to the people of Russia that you should join us in denouncing the awful, cruel Putin's regime, and tell that the emperor is naked.
Right. I think you're right that I think all the artists on this panel are probably don't think of their art as a weapon of war, but as a weapon of resistance. When I think about art as a weapon of war, I think about Hollywood. I mean, that's like, Top Gun 2 is like one of the greatest propaganda movies ever made, right? And so Hollywood is our unofficial ministry of propaganda in the United States. That's how we use art as a weapon of war. But now I'd like for our panelists to respond to the question of the panel. How is art a weapon of war? You can answer it any way you want to, and anybody can jump in.
You got it.
No, I'm the thought of art as a form of resistance versus, I think there's, my brain is spinning right now, because you also mentioned there's 2 wars. There's the war that happens in the war of memory, or the war, I forget how you...
All wars are fought twice.
Twice.
The first time on the battlefield, the second time in memory. Trademark me. Okay, go ahead.
And I think, how is art a weapon of war? I'm thinking about it in those two specific lanes of like art as openly addressing and confronting what is physically and tangibly in front of a group of people, versus the spiritual, emotional layer that's underneath that, and how does art function to sustain hope and a desire for something better, and like how is art on those 2 fronts evolving? It's not an answer, that's just kind of like the literal, tangible fighting the thing that's in front of us, versus like how are we using art to actually connect into who we are and to how we express ourselves, and claiming that as power, rather than letting some state or some political regime dictate or take that power away.
I believe art, comes out of is oftentimes a commentary on the times and a response to current events and informed by so much that came before it. Art is the heart and soul of the person that makes it, and it's what it is the culmination of all of these experiences, right? And with that, it's a very human element to it we don't always think about this in terms of, because of consumerism and commodification, but at the core of art is humanity. And if we think about it that way, then you think about it in terms of the human cost that comes with war and the urgency that comes with creating something that speaks to the why or the why not, right? And I mean, and let's not kid ourselves. Art is used in the other, to the counter as well. It can be used in a way that is in a co-optive way to promote a war as well. But what I think the general consensus is we're talking on the resistance side. I think about the Black Panthers. I think about the Emory Douglas and all of the newspapers that were distributed, the Black Panther newspapers that had art on every cover. Beautiful works, representation of beautiful black work of black people, but also of very urgent issues, right? That were rooted in agency, giving people agency to understand that they can play a role in resisting this, or fighting back. And I think that's how art can be used as a weapon in terms of what weapons do we have, right? We think about war as something with as militarized, tanks and guns and the like. But if you take it down to a micro level, and you look at the news every day, you understand that there's battles being fought in all kind of ways, and they're random, and then that takes it down to a very human, very, very human level. And I think that's the core of all of it. Pardon me, y'all. I just had a child. My wife just had a child, and so I may not be so coherent. But yeah, I'm thinking about it a lot now, even more so because of this child and the agency that I'm able to give to him, right? Whatever avenue he chooses. Hopefully it's art. But the agency that he feels that he has to change, the power to change something or to be a participant in something that changes things for the better. That's how art can be used as a weapon in war or against war.
Well, I like to always think about the most effective way how you can achieve something. So the government has a monopoly on violence. So if you go, Noam Chomsky talks a lot about it. If you go against the government with violence, there are rare cases when it works. But these days, with people treating violence with less and people obviously do not love violence as they used to love it 500 years ago. So I guess if you're trying to bring good in the world, and especially good for minorities, vulnerable communities, if you try to get your point across, and if you try to use violence in the war, then probably most likely what's going to happen, you're just going to end up in jail for 25 years or more, which is not really effective. You can use your time better. So if you create instruments of art propaganda, what I do, you technically do not commit a crime, even though sometimes it is classified by governments as crime, because they're not stupid as well, at least some of them. So they realize that it's an effective instrument in the war. So I just think it's our best bet to work on the symbolic level and change people's minds. And then after that, you can actually create a momentum where you're going to have so many people behind you. So you, even the people with tanks are going to move to your side. and there's not going to be need and bloodshed. And just one example of using art as a weapon in war. Over a year ago, when the war in Ukraine started, we created a fundraiser with a single art piece. It was a Ukrainian flag, and we raised $7 million in 2 days, and we sent those money to Ukraine to protect themselves from the Russian aggressor.
Yeah.
Art as a weapon of war. Is it art as a weapon of war or as a weapon in war?
Could be both.
Both?
Bianca says in.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I need to break down that sentence, all the prepositions. I think, okay, the first thing that comes to my mind is obviously propaganda, and more propagandas that are explicit, like Hollywood movies, and the war mentality that's constantly fed the population through the entertainment business and the industry. But then there's other more subtle forms of art used as propaganda, such as abstract expressionism that the US used during the Cold War. Works of Rauschenberg and abstract expressionist painters in the collections of MoMA, and the way that it was presented as a tool against Russian propaganda that was very explicit, and the US really made ABEX this really sophisticated front of its art and culture. So that's one example that comes to mind that is propaganda, but it's very implicit and it's very well planned by people who have read a lot of critical theory and work for the CIA. But then the other thing that I was thinking was, to me, there's really no art during war or after war. To me, there's constant war. And when I think about peace and the impossibility of peace in the world that we're living today, I think about, how art can possibly open up a possibility, a different sensibility to undo all the wars that have been ingrained in us as a culture. And by that, I don't mean just Americans or like the people in the US, but in general, how to undo the harm that propaganda of war has been doing to us. Is not necessarily making counter propaganda, is creating a different way of relating, it is creating a different way of thinking through aesthetic means and images and colors and touch and smell and writing, like you were mentioning. And I think that battle is fought in memory. And the best that art can do, in my opinion, is really to be a good recorder, a really good observer of events, and oftentimes retrospectively, and not be reactionary to the events, even though they're immediate and they're important and they need to be fought. But art that has been made during the war or in relation to or as a response to tyranny, to me, ones that really don't age for me are ones that have been created with a bit of a distance and with a retrospection to the violent event.
Well, I think we have time for one last question for our panelists, and then we'll take questions from the audience. And you've made my job really easy, all right? So you have such great answers. But one of the things that I've noticed in all of your responses, I think, and it goes back to this idea of the conundrum, Khalil, that you raised, black people experience a conundrum being in this country for fairly obvious reasons. But then the state blames the victim. The state says, you're the problem, you're the conundrum. But I think so much of all of your responses have been saying, no, the conundrum is actually systemic. Yeah. If the flag, for example, is both an object of pride but an object of threat for black people, it's not the problem of black people per se, it's the fact that the flag has been deployed systemically by this country. And that system is a part of who we are as Americans. And I think there are a lot of Americans who want to believe, we're on the path to a more perfect union. I'm a lot more skeptical of that, because I think the conundrum is built into the very nature of American society, right? But I think all of your work in different ways addresses the conundrum of war as a system, not just an individual war as terrible and traumatic as individual wars are, but the systemic nature of war, the repetitive nature of war. You have to remember that we live in a military-industrial complex, and it was Republican Dwight Eisenhower who came up with that term to describe the United States. So just want to ask you for a last meditation against that kind of, horrible picture I just sketched of systemic war, you all also have a belief, from what I've been hearing, in the agency of the artist and the power of art. You know, yes, Top Gun 2 is like $1 billion behemoth, but against that, somehow we still have to have faith in the work that individual artists, art companies, protest movements, punk movements, and so on have created in the face of this systemic violence. Last thought on that, as art as agency, art as resistance, art as power, in terms of whatever way that's affected or been routed through your lives or your careers.
I just want us to think about Pablo Picasso's Guernica. It was just one guy, but wildly influential.
For those of you who haven't seen The Green Table, there's one character in The Green Table that does not get killed by death, and it's the profiteer. And he enters this whole conversation about the relationship between war and capitalism and how they are two intersecting continuous circles. And it always gets me in the ballet when he's able to just kind of relate to, dance with, and then kind of escape. But despite all that, I do think that using capitalism or using money to build the spaces and the resources to create communities where that sense of individual expression is actually allowed to flourish. For me, it goes to education, not just performance. It really goes to, like, what are we doing for the children now? What are the entry points? What are they reading? How are they reading about their history? How are they creating? How are they drawing? What access to instruments do they have? What instruments to dance clothes do they have? You know, like really focusing in on what are those opportunities to keep that creative impulse alive, or spark it when they're young, and then keep it alive as they get older, and as institutional fill in the blank tries to take that away from them. And that's where a lot of my focus is right now, is on curriculum building, and starting with the next generation as well as the artists who I do, work with.
I'm like you. I can be quite cynical around progress. If what I'm doing and what we're doing actually moves the needle, right? I have the privilege of being very energized by my work, by the people I see it affect, and the people I get to interact with, particularly young people. And seeing what inspiration does, like in real time, and how that transfers. But I often am met with, is it enough, but I do believe in the micro affecting the macro. And I do feel that a ripple turns into a wave. And so it always leaves me with, what choice do we have, right? What choice do we have? What do we roll over? Do you lay down, or do you create? And that's the question I believe that we have to ask ourselves in these times and throughout time, right? What do we do? What do we create? And how do we, how does it live? And what is it for? And I think the answers are always there in the whys, and that's what keeps me pushing and keeps me hopeful and faithful, even in the midst of so much evidence to the contrary. Question is, what choice do we have? And I go back to that every time, and I wouldn't decide any differently any time.
I would just, please. I would just add that, as an artist who works, in extremely precarious conditions, I don't want to project a false image of myself. The other war that we're waging, that is waged against us, is the burnout wars of neoliberalism and the demand of overproduction and, trying to have a, studio and pay for living, in some of the most expensive cities in the world that is not just haphazard, that we can't afford to, rent apartments in the city. That is also a systematic war that we're living in. But the thing that keeps me drawn to art and believe in it as an educator, which is also very precarious, is the fact that a lot of the political decisions and the manipulations that the states are able to inflict on us is because of fear. They tap into fear. And I think turning into art is the realm that, and literature, I'm not talking about vision or just like literary or just visual arts. Art is the place that I turn to learn how to be free, because I've seen examples of people who have allowed themselves to really create from a place that has no fear and has no limits to its imagination. But that is really hard to maintain because we live under the conditions that make us really one, be precarious, to really have to brand ourselves and make ourselves legible in a certain way because of career and because of financial reasons. But still, I think that idea, that freedom that I've seen in the creation of the filmmakers and artists and writers that I have seen have really changed the way that I look at the world, and that's probably what keeps me going despite the precarity.
Thank you for all of your responses.
All right, so we're going to move into audience question and answer. I'm going to start with an online question. If you have a question, please come line up right here beside me. All right, we're going to start with, how has the internet changed the way art interacts with war?
Let's see. How has the internet changed the way that art? It's a great question, number one. Got me stumped.
It's
I
going
don't
to
know.
change even more as AI getting stronger with deepfakes. That's going to be interesting because like we all reacted on images of Donald Trump getting arrested, but it kind of looked fake. But it's not going to look fake in a year from now. So I guess that is one.
No.
But I mean, internet is just a tool, and you know, it's like it's up to us if you use it for good or for bad. And hopefully, there are going to be more people who are going to be excited of using internet as a good tool.
That's a great point, though. That
And I think
the
internet
deepfakes are-
hygiene is a really important thing as well. So just like don't. I mean, like in activist community, people talk about it a lot. Obviously, like can you be just an activist on the internet? I think it is possible. I mean, if you make enough change, but you obviously can totally just get trapped in social media bullshit. But if you create, on the other hand, if you create like say a media outlet or a really interesting blog, that's this completely other story.
Not truly.
Okay. We're going to move on to the next question.
Hi, my name is Hans. I'm from LA. You might have kind of covered this already, but aside from your art expression, what methods of lifestyle practices do you personally employ on a daily basis that help you cope with the injustices that you can't unsee? And why do you think that helps you?
I hug my dog a lot.
Me too. Me too. I really embrace the golden rule. I really embrace treating people the way that I want to be treated. I really believe in equality. I really believe that for me to find equality or to have equality means I gotta want the same thing for you. And if I deny that in you, I deny that in myself. That keeps me very focused on a certain way of being and a certain way of interacting. I want to have good experiences. I want to have good relationships and transactions because those are things that are going to empower me and energize me, and that's what I kind of just turn to. I take certain things as givens. I know that I'm going to be met with certain BS and certain approaches to life and living, but that doesn't mean that it has to inform the way that I approach life and living. And I just kind of stand firm in that.
I actually got off social media. I mean, I still have my accounts, but I don't check social media. There was a point in it, I think, that feed cycle that is being conjured was taking time away from the work that I think I'm here to do, which is to work with the company and the artists in the room and figure out what are the resources they need to take their artistry to the next level. So it was it was just like, this is not the system that should be functional and should be making me feel all these things is actually the antithesis of what I'm actually here to do. So I check as when my marketing director says you have to check it, like, please check this and look at this. Like I look at it, but it was not functional to my sense of self and place in the world, ironically. In creating all that access, it did the opposite.
Well, I'm a total mess, so I guess I'm not a good person to give advice on mental health. But I like my caffeine pills in the morning. I do omega-3, really helps. I work a lot, and I know it's not probably not the best way to run from injustices in the world, but it helps me personally. It doesn't work nicely always for my mental health, because then I just run to the point of exhaustion, and I'm in a deep point. But it does help. It does help to react immediately to injustices that you see with some sort of action that you can do. And usually I try to come up with simple steps that I can make. And even if those steps are not as big as I wanted them to be, even they might seem insignificant, but I know that for my mental health, it's still important to make them, to just keep moving.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next question.
Hi, my name is Annie. I'm with the RevComs. We're the ones standing on the American and the Russian flags over there because it is this system and not humanity that needs to become extinct. And I just, to Nadya, to hear you talk about such courage and determination to go up against the fascist regime of Putin and, a junior gangster imperialist, I do want to ask, not mainly you, although if you want to speak to it, but how do there's so much complicity and passivity from the bulk of American artists when they're living in the biggest imperialist monster in the world, USA, #1 oppressor in the world. And it's very easy to applaud you over there, but I want to know how people feel the challenge to stand up against what is, again, the brutalist imperialist dominator threatening the world with nuclear annihilation and environmental devastation. And then I want to invite, if you're feeling hopeless, come talk with me after, because there is another way the world could be, although that will take an actual revolution. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think I would pass the mic to actual Americans, because I only have experience of dealing with Russian autocracy, and I'm not an expert in the American one. But I'm curious, what do you think?
First off, peace to you and thank you. I feel that every day, what you're saying. And I don't profess to have those answers. I just know that consciousness is at the core of it. Kind of what we all have to be illuminated to is to how this is a much broader picture and more than what we see or what is shown to us. And we have to be willing to take deeper dives and to have different conversations and want that for ourselves and each other to be able to come to certain realizations and perhaps solutions. But I do not profess to have the answers. It's a confusing place to be because you're fighting. We're in a society where we're fighting every day just to maintain, and where there are so much of our population that's fighting every day just to have food on the table, much less be able to figure out what bigger issue is going on, how to keep their kids safe and all of these just existential things. So it's hard to even get past that. In some ways, it's a privileged place to be able to look broader than that. Yeah. And so it's hard. It's just confusing because what do you do? How do you look past your everyday existence that you're just scratching and scraping, trying to hang on, right? And your kid, you know what I mean? So that's a hard one for me to answer.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just wanted to add that I appreciated that because, you know, when we talk about art, we tend to separate it from the rest of the ecosystem that we're a part of. And those are very entangled. Yeah, I mean, there's no this is not a secret that the US is the biggest weapon manufacturer and exporter of the world. So there's something to be said about, you know, war as a, you know, there is an incentive in creating and continuing wars. And a lot of those individual, I mean, when we think about museums and, you know, those are not just abstract spaces where we hang paintings. There's like a lot of individuals with a lot of power and a lot of money that sit and have a lot of say in how those spaces are operated. So those words are very much entangled. And that's what I meant by peace. What do we even mean by peace? We're living in war. And that's what I mean by, you know, being conscious of that when I make, it's not that war that I lived through and ended. It's like, it's constant war. And how does that manifest in my work? And how do I think about that? How to not to contribute to this, to the sustenance of this never-ending finance drive.
Okay, well, that's the last question that we have time for, so I'm going to pass it back to you, Viet.
Thank you. Yeah. It's time for us to close, so I want to thank you all for your incredible conversation. It's been an honor to speak with each of you. And thank you to everyone in our audience for joining us tonight. You'll be able to find a summary of our talk at zocalopublicsquare.org by tomorrow, plus interviews with all our panelists. You can also subscribe to Zocalo's newsletter, podcast, and social media. Before we depart, I just want to remind everybody there is a free reception that you're all welcome to. That'll take place behind the wine bar immediately after this, so we'll see you there. For now, Gelare, Khalil, Michael, and Nadya, thank you again for your conversation tonight. Everyone, please give our guest another round of applause.
Thank you, Viet.
Thank you.
All right. Off to the reception.